Multiple reports now are revealing that there was a massive screw up at the U.S. military outpost. They call it Tower 22 in Jordan, that the Iranians timed their drone attack for the return of an American drone. This is from the Wall Street Journal this morning. The return of the U.S. drone led to confusion over whether the incoming drone was friend or foe, officials have concluded. They did caution the inquiry into the attack is at an early stage. The enemy drone was launched from Iraq by militia backed by Tehran and struck the outpost living quarters. An American defense official said on Monday the U.S. has yet to find evidence Iran directed the Sunday attack themselves, which killed 3 U.S. troops and wounded more than 40 more, but Tehran provided the weapons. In other words, Iran is saying it wasn't us, it was just militia that has our back, and it was the militia that did it, but we didn't know they were doing it. And the militia had its drone follow a U.S. drone in, at least according to the preliminary report. And it is our presumption, it is their presumption, that the 2 drones followed in such close sync that it might be they didn't see the enemy drone, they were tracking the American drone. Or there was confusion. To Ryan, the caller's point, you would think that they would be able to distinguish our drone from someone else's drone. There was clearly some sort of breakdown, and it led to the deaths of 3 Americans and wounding, in some cases critically wounding, more than 25 other people. It is a serious, serious situation, and one that must be dealt with. And frankly, as I've mentioned earlier, and as callers have pointed out to me, this is very, very similar to the situation that led us into full involvement in Vietnam, where Robert McNamara engaged in a tit-for-tat with the North Vietnamese communists, where they would do something, so we would respond. They'd do something else, and we'd respond in kind. And it just kept going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until it led to a full-scale war because we did not punch hard first. And Democrats on Capitol Hill, they don't want to forcefully engage. I want to play for you some of the commentary here. First, this is Mickey Sherrill. She is a congresswoman from New Jersey on the Armed Services Committee and a Democrat.
So Iran has done, quite frankly, has done a lot of work to fund terrorist groups, cells across the region, Hezbollah, the Houthis, etc. And we are seeing the results of that work. A lot of these groups are not in direct contact, but are nevertheless attempting to destabilize the region, want to draw the United States into this conflict. And I think that we have to be very careful here. You know, sure, it feels good. It feels macho to say that we are going to destroy our enemies. But at this time, what the United States often does best is not simply go in half-cocked, but rather gather our allies, bring a force to bear of world opinion of our allies, and back down those who would create this instability. And I think we've seen some signs that Iran does not want to get into this full-scale war. Make no mistake, the United States is ready for it. We can certainly assert our power and might throughout the region of any attackers. But what we are trying to do here is to prevent a full-scale war. We are trying to deter this aggression. The president is working hard. He has options on the table to increase the force that we use. We will likely do that, as we'll see in the coming weeks, and we will hopefully see less aggression. I also think that we aren't doing this in a vacuum.
Right.
We are doing this combined with our attempts right now to have a pause in the fighting between the Israelis and Hamas so that we can get hostages freed and so that we can have a better outcome in that war right now.
So in other words, we're going to engage in a continuous tit for tat and not actually seriously engage. I mean, this is the view from the Pentagon.
Well, look, what we know is that we have been able to take capabilities off the table of these IRGC-backed groups. The capabilities that they had yesterday, they no longer have today. And so, yes, we do assess that we have been able to successfully disrupt and degrade their capabilities. By no means are we saying that we've taken everything off the map for them, but we have made it harder for them to launch attacks at our U.S. forces, whether it be in the Red Sea or in Iraq or Syria.
Right. We've made it harder, but they're still able to attack. On the other side of this is Senator Tom Cotton, one of the hawks in the Senate. He was in the military.
Bill, you laid out 4 options for how we could retaliate against Iran. I'd add a 5th, which is all of the above. There has to be devastating military retaliation for the targeting of American troops in Jordan, a friendly nation, across international borders, leaving 3 dead Americans and more than 36 wounded. And some of those, Bill, are in grave critical condition as well. This is not an anomaly for Iran. This is what they've been doing for 45 years, but they have amped it up under Joe Biden and before him Barack Obama, because the Obama-Biden foreign policy has been one of appeasement and conciliation. We have to totally reverse that policy, starting with retaliatory strikes right now and continuing beyond that to ensure that we're no longer trying to bribe the Ayatollahs with billions of dollars. We're not looking the other way whenever they cheat on sanctions, and we're certainly not going to tolerate even the slightest provocation against our troops in the Middle East. Anything else will simply invite more attacks.
Yes. Look, I think Tom Cotton gets the better of the argument here. It's very clear here that we need to punch back hard. We've got to punch back hard. This is Joe Biden's former head of CENTCOM.
Well, I think we begin by realizing, Wolf, that if we want to prevent escalation, we need to leave the theater. If our primary goal is to not have something escalate, we need to get out. That's obviously not our primary goal. So we need to get comfortable with the fact that there can be escalation associated with this. The next thing I would say is Secretary Blinken's words are very strong, very forceful, very on point. We need to match them with action. And we have not done so over the course of the 150 attacks or so that have preceded this lethal attack and the loss of these 3 brave Americans.
100+ attacks. And Joe Biden continues to slap him with a white glove and say, tut, tut. I mean, I mentioned this to you yesterday. Iran responds to force. We have not been forceful with Iran. We have tried to respond in kind with minimal force. And Iran interprets that as weakness. This is the NBC News' analyst.
Well, the United States has been reluctant to conduct any attacks, and in doing any of the attacks, the counterstrikes, has been limited and what the administration perceives to be proportional. And the principal reason is that the perception in Washington is that anything more than that will widen the war. Critics say, and probably properly so, that Iran's allies don't need any excuse to continue or even widen their attacks. Iran is fairly well convinced, and probably properly, that the United States is reluctant to attack Iran directly.
Y'all, we've got to really punch hard here. I don't know what Joe Biden has in store. The news headlines today are that Joe Biden has determined a path forward. In Vietnam, Joe Biden decided we needed to get out of Vietnam. After Americans were bombed at the Marine base in Libya or in Lebanon, Joe Biden said we need to get out of Lebanon. After all the attacks after 2003 against our troops in Iraq, Joe Biden said we needed to get out of Iraq. He pulled us out of Afghanistan and handed it back to the Taliban. Iran knows who they're dealing with. An old dog isn't going to learn new tricks. And Joe Biden, the old dog, his favorite trick is to tuck tail and run. Iran knows this. Some of you say we should get out of the Middle East. How does that work for you? We get out of the Middle East, Iran invades Israel, takes over Iraq, controls oil production. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, they move to get closer ties to China as their protector because they don't have us. Destabilizes the oil trade against us. Destabilizes Israel, forcing our hand there unless we're going to let them be wiped out. Starts a huge war that will draw us back in. Isolationism is the easy out that causes all sorts of problems. And historically, every time the United States has retreated from the world stage, people who do not have our interests move in to take over, forcing us back in. And it always is more costly and more expensive to get back in once you've withdrawn. It is the easy, cheap answer. It is the thrilling answer to people who want to placate to the seal-clapping crowd of just tell me what I want to hear. I want to get out, get us out. There's no reason for our troops to be there. Those three soldiers from Georgia, why did they die? Was their death in vain? It's really easy to say if we weren't there, they wouldn't have died. Because you're playing against the hypothetical of if we weren't there, how many more people would die? And historically, a lot. We shouldn't have to do it for you to see it, to believe it, because we will be drawn back in. If we want to stop it, we punch Iran hard. Doesn't mean we launch a direct strike on Iran as some senators want. But there's got to be some direct, hard annihilation action. Stop tickling them. They're enjoying the tickling that Joe Biden is doing. Tell Joe Biden it's corn pop. Maybe he'll actually throw a punch. But the historic reality is that every time a punch is thrown at us, Joe Biden wants to tuck tail and run. And Iran knows that, which is exactly the problem we're having. If Joe Biden wants to change the dynamic, instead of tucking tail and running, he's going to throw some punches. They're going to be hard hitting. They're going to be disproportionate. And they're going to send the signal we're done screwing around with Iran. But I have no belief that Lloyd Austin and Anthony Blinken and what's his name, Jake Sullivan and Joe Biden will ever bother doing that, because in their worldview, Iran is the oppressed and we're the oppressor, and the oppressor must be careful in how they unleash their oppression. We're dealing with the wokes in charge, and all it does is get 3 American service members killed.
When the world